Hello, everyone. My name's Cameron Weber. Welcome to another exciting edition of Hardfire Television on Brooklyn Free Speech Media. With me, I have Devin Balkind.
Hi.
Devin is the president of an open source software foundation.
Open Source Software Foundation.
Yeah, is that what it is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, do you want to? And then also, you're the president of the Brooklyn Libertarian Party.
Yeah, chair.
Chair. Yeah, I was chair for 3 years back. Like 5 years ago, I was chair for 3 years.
Nice one.
I ran on the platform not to do anything, and then I won twice in a row. So, but
I ran on the opposite platform.
yeah, you're building it up. Yeah, you're building it up definitely, and there's a whole new generation of people. But so today, welcome to Hardfire, Devin.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So today we're talking about democracy and technology, right? First, let's. So, what is democracy, Devin? What is it, according to you? What is democracy?
Well, I mean, from the Greek, it's people power. So we tend to think of democracy as voting, but really it's about people the public having the power to over their lives and over their state.
Sure.
Their government.
Yeah, their state with a capital S, the Hegelian state, right? And I looked it up on Wiki, and it also means citizens directly or through their representatives forming the governing body in Wiki. Do you believe Wiki is a good source?
Like Wikipedia?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a Wikipedia fan.
Oh, me
sure.
too. Yeah, very rarely wrong, I find.
Yeah.
And also the rule of majority. It also says, yeah. So I think you're under the opinion that democracy or representative democracy has failed in the United States, or could be improved, or.
Yeah, I would say. I mean, failed is a pretty final term.
The project is not over.
The project's not over. There's certainly a tremendous amount of room for improvement. I'd say at all levels, whether you look local, state, or federal.
Yeah.
Particularly in New York, where our political power is really distributed, we're basically a easy target for the state government. New York City is an easy target for the state government to kind of extract our wealth because
it all goes up.
Our metropolitan region is split between Connecticut, New Jersey, upstate counties, and New York City. So if you're in LA, it looks a lot. Your political scenario is a lot different than what we have here.
Interesting. Right, where a lot of the metropolitan area tax money goes to upstate New York for economic development.
Yeah, and a lot of the
economic development.
Yeah, and a lot of the people who work in New York City, live in New Jersey or live in Connecticut too. So that's not the same as a place like LA where everybody's in the state of California who's interacting with the city, and also the county there is massive and powerful.
So there's more checks and balances.
They get much better representation, both at their municipal level or at their metro regional level and at the state level than we do. Yeah,
well, I'm a classical liberal or an anti-federalist, and my big pet peeve is that during the classical liberal period of history, say 1870, after the slaves are freed in the United States, up through World War I, the state at all levels was 5%. And then you have World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, and now the state at all levels is up to 45%. So in a country like the United States, which was founded on limited government, we no longer have that. So for me, that's why democracy has failed, at least. What do you think of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, what I'm running on in terms, like the
Oh, you ran for office.
I ran for office, and also the concept that I'm pursuing within the Libertarian Party is this idea of big city libertarianism, which is something that I think that could be much more successful.
Somebody told me once, a leftist, economics, one of my economics professors, I won't say his name, but I respect him very much, said that big cities need big government. I don't know if he was the first one to say that, but you're back to your big city libertarianism.
Well, I think that the Libertarian Party in general could achieve a lot more success in cities, which right now we're not doing well in cities. We do much better in rural and suburban communities than we do in cities. If we accept the fact that living in a city, maybe it doesn't require big government, but it certainly is a choice that people make. And if people are choosing to live in a big city, then we have to accept the fact that they want to engage in like civic life in a way that like
Sure.
the vast majority of city residents want to engage in city life. And so I think that we could have an alliance between really the super small government, rural and suburban communities, you know, in Arizona and New Hampshire,
and people in California want to carve out San Francisco, Los Angeles.
Yeah, let the metro areas. There's a thing that's taking place all around the world with metro areas, metropolitan areas.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, which are, you know, in New York, our metropolitan area is about 22 million people, depending on how you count it. It consists of like 23 different counties along actually four states. There's one county even in Pennsylvania that would be considered in the metropolitan area of New York City.
Yeah.
And so, you know, these entities need to have some type of representation. And that we need to and that representation might look a lot more like what's happening in London or Hong Kong or Singapore than what's happening in, you know, New Hampshire or Arizona.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to start looking more towards how we can blur the borders a bit so that we can achieve a more kind of consistent representation for the public in general. And I think that that's something that when you look at how big the federal government has become, particularly from the 1870s, something that all libertarians, I believe, should agree on is that the federal government needs to be drastically smaller.
Do you want to talk about that? Do you want to talk about the Anti-Federalists, the Articles of Confederation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, particularly the way modern conservatism has shaped up, you know, it's as if the Constitution was the ultimate concept of liberty.
I call it the Constitution.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So the United States won the American Civil War, or it was a Civil War, but I mean the Revolutionary War, under the Articles of Confederation. And the Articles of Confederation was 13 independent states who unanimously agreed to the Articles of Confederation. Right? Then you have the battle over the Constitution, and whatever, we can talk about that battle, but the end result of the Constitution was only 9 of the 13 states ratified the Constitution, and 4 of those states ratified it with the right to secede, which ended with, of course, Abraham Lincoln didn't allow them to secede. So you had the Jeffersonians, who were the small federal state, and the Hamiltonians, which were the large federal state. They wanted, if you ever read De Lorenzo's Hamilton's Curse, have you ever read that? He said that Hamilton wanted the empire, but he wanted to be the emperor. He wanted to be the king. So the Hamiltonians won out in the end. So the Constitution allegedly has a limited government ideology, but in fact both the Democrats and the Republicans step all over the Constitution to allow their special interests to gain power and then blame each other for violating the Constitution. At least that's what I've found.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that's an accurate assessment.
Yeah.
And, you know, before that, right, we had the Articles of Confederation, and there was a vibrant public debate taking place in newspapers all over the country around whether or not we should ratify the Constitution. And that part of history seems to kind of get lost. And I would say
it's coming back a little bit. People are starting to talk about it more a little bit, I think. There's been some recent books, the Independent Institute. I think right now at the University of Chicago, the National Endowment of Humanities is talking about the Enlightenment Project. So I think people are starting to re-examine somewhat this.
I hope so. I think in general, you know, libertarianism and anarchism as a political concept are slowly coming back in vogue, despite the best efforts of kind of like the establishment.
Yeah, I personally think a lot of it was triggered by all the bailouts. Now let's stick to your idea of participatory democracy, technology and democracy. And then, well, for example, the Hamiltonians won the constitutional debate against the Anti-Federalists, and within the first week, and this is from Charles Beard, Economic Interpretation of the U.S. Constitution, within the first week there were 20 special interest groups seeking trade protection within the first U.S. Congress, within the first week. So the end result is exactly what we've got today, is the protectionism. And if you know from special interest protectionism, because you need to raise $2 billion to become the American president, right? So you know, the protectionism, which is playing out huge today, which was what the Anti-Federalists warned us about how many years ago? 250 years ago or something. Yeah. So, Devin, you believe we should move towards participatory democracy, and especially as enabled by technology. What is participatory democracy, and what is your vision?
Yeah, well, I mean, just as a disclaimer, you know, it's other people's vision. You know,
Yeah.
I share it, but you know, there's a lot of folks who are seeing what I'm about to talk about happening. I mean, I think that the idea that you just vote once every 4 years or 2 years,
Right.
you know, isn't working out very well.
No, you should be able to vote every day.
I mean, and you know, through the market,
And there's
do
no
get to-
exit option anymore. Under the independent 13 states, there was an exit option. You could go to whichever state policies you believe that. And now with the increase of the federal government and the federalism buying off the states with transfer payments, there is no exit option.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's true. I mean, I think that's one reason why, you know, the libertarian movement of the future, a libertarian movement that can succeed in cities, is one that focuses where the shared interest is reducing the power and the influence of the federal government, and then letting cities and states let people reduce the power of the federal government so people can move to the places that align with their politics a little bit more and align with their culture a little bit more.
Sure.
You know? Now, that's not saying, you know, people say, well, what about human rights? You know, human rights is something that the federal government should be upholding. But anyway, not to
everyone
not to
treated the
deviate.
same under law.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like one of the few things I think even, you know, the most hardcore libertarians will agree with. Which is that that is actually a legitimate role for the state, the federal state, which has a monopoly on the use of force, to actually exercise.
And on monetary policy and trade policy. And
well, monetary policy, you know, that's something that's debatable. But you know, we could get into that.
Is Bitcoin an alt currency? Is that a form of participatory democracy to a certain extent?
Well, so when it comes to participatory democracy, let's focus on the participatory democracy side.
Yeah.
The idea is that voting once every 2 years or every 4 years isn't enough to get the government that people deserve. And to collect the right feedback so that even political officials that want to serve in the public interest know what they should be doing. Right?
Asymmetrical information.
You look at the market, right? You talk to real capitalists, and they'll say, you know, people you vote with your dollars, right? You support the brands and the companies that you like by giving them money.
Sure.
And so that's a constant feedback mechanism.
The market test.
And so
politics has no real market test.
No, it doesn't. And what's happening in places like Taiwan and also city governments around the world.
Right. I know you want to give examples. I know you want to give an example about Madrid, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Reykjavik, and North Syria.
Yeah.
Which one do you want to start with?
All of these places, maybe not so much Hong Kong, but all of these places are engaged in kind of a much deeper form of participatory democracy, where they're genuinely going to the public and they're saying, how can we create mechanisms that allow you to have a deep influence in what laws are created, what policies are enacted, and how those policies are enacted. And so there's kind of two pieces to that pie. One of them is much more transparent government operation. So where's the money going and why? And that gets more into kind of participatory budgeting, but not necessarily participatory budgeting in the way we see it in New York, and into participatory democratic practices. And these are things that are basically feedback collection mechanisms. So it's kind of like polling, like what does the public think about this stuff? But all the data is very, the data is made public kind of immediately, and also there's processes around using that information to then facilitate public conversations that allow the public to really drive from kind of the introduction of an issue, the process all the way from the introduction of an issue through to making a policy proposal that then is that the legislatures are pressured then to just enact. And so it's not like, oh, I think, you know, I vote for this policy, I vote for that policy. It's actually real participatory democracy, in the way we're seeing it, particularly in Taiwan, is this deliberate effort to let the public identify their ideas and then bring them together through a consensus-building process, as opposed to a kind of a majority wins process where 51% gets what they want and then 49%.
Oh, a consensus
doesn't.
process, like Poland, like Liberian veto.
It's I don't know about that, but I mean, it is the goal with participatory democracy, unlike representative democracy,
consensus
is consensus as opposed to beating your opponent. Because there shouldn't be an opponent. We're talking about public policy issues that everyone's going to have to live with.
I used to be on my co-op board, and we were doing in Brooklyn, and we're doing a $1 million or so renovation job, and a lot of contentious issues. And I tried to do it by consensus as my committee. And it was very difficult to get consensus opinion when people are impassioned about things. But what was the example you just gave?
Well, when it comes to
how does technology aid that? That's your thing.
Well, I mean, there's technology like software, and there's also technology like technique, right? And so there's a process. So, if you are untrained in how to build consensus, then it's going to be very hard to do. But there are processes that have been developed by institutes and by corporations and by negotiating bodies for how to actually get people to consensus through a facilitated process. And that process, technology can be very, very useful for that process, especially if you're using it with a large amount of people. The process that is most popular, there seems to be kind of the winner, is a process called ORID. Which is kind of a 4-step process.
Is it Hong Kong uses this, or
Taiwan uses this?
Taiwan uses this
pretty aggressively, and they've built a technology ecosystem around this.
Yeah, you're very technologically oriented. What about the third of the population, which are baby boomers or older?
So in Taiwan, they really view victory like. Entertainment is a big part of this process because you need to get people to participate. And so it's not that everyone has to be a technologist to use the tools. It's that they're using technologies like live streams. They're also doing like theater performances and making like engaging public content that gets people where they are so that they can
That's
generate
exactly
feedback.
What Poland did against the Soviets.
Yeah,
they used theater.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is if politics isn't entertaining, then people won't participate, and we can't get the type of results that we want. So that is ORID is a 4-step process. That I don't want to do it wrong, but it basically you bring people through the first phase is observation, where everyone kind of says what they observe about an issue, and then they respond. How they respond to that issue, kind of from an emotion. The next phase is response. How they respond to it in like an emotional way. And then what is I is darn. I had just reviewed it. Now I'm a little.
No worry.
It might be identification of possible solutions. And then D is decision, I believe, around what solutions should be done. And so if you work through these facilitated processes using technology as an aid, but not as a not as like a fetish item, you know what I mean? Not as like oh, it's fun to work through this because technology is fun.
You were the first one to use a Marxist term.
Yeah, well, you've got to speak to the public. I mean, like,
sure, yeah. So how about secessionism, though? I mean, wouldn't that facilitate consensus? Is decentralization of the polities?
I mean, I certainly think so. I mean, I think we need to get real about the metro-regional government as the future, like metro-regional governments in conversation and network together seems to me like the future of kind of like governance in the world, right, basically.
Decentralizing power.
And distributing power, because I don't think we want to see,
decentralizing power, distributing power with a goal towards consensus.
Right, and consensus building, and also having a powerful framework to be able to enforce human rights, like actually enforce, that people, human rights against, so that people, can live.
So that
as
the Japanese
freely
aren't
as they
being
should
thrown
be.
into the concentration
Right.
camps.
I mean, absolutely. And there's no reason why, I've always thought that if the federal government focused on that job as opposed to all this other stuff, they should be exceptionally good at it. And that's actually something that, when you look at how, how the police and law enforcement and military, like that's kind of the core of the core of the training is how to manage kind of like human life. Challenge, like the challenges of like murders, security, like that's what the goal is, and that's an appropriate role for in the federal government, in my perspective. But then when you get to all of these policy issues around, health, education, transportation, these are things that like local communities need to decide. And I think what we're seeing with the Trump, I think we're seeing some recognition on the left or among liberals
to personalize it instead of the federal government is a utilitarian, where the state pretends to know more about you than you know what's best for yourself. And so what it ends up is an elitist thing where you have Keynesian economics controlling government expenditures, and interest rates, which distort the economy, and then people, and then we have 100 million people now on getting food stamps, taking away their right to self-determination, which perpetuates over and over again. So, I mean, I guess we're talking more about the failure of American democracy. But let's go to your, because I know you're interested in the technological solutions. You gave me some links.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at how the market, the world of, so I view, and I'm of the people who are interested in participatory democracy. I don't hear a lot of them talking about what I'm about to say, but if you look at marketing, the marketing corporations are extremely good at figuring out what it is people want, taking that feedback. They don't do it in an open and transparent way, but taking that feedback to create products that people care about. And so we are generating, you see with the Facebook scandal that's taking place
that's
now,
what I wanted to ask you. Have you been following that
absolutely.
testimony?
We're generating a huge amount of data about what our preferences are. And if that were reflected to us in an honest way, then we could have much more sophisticated policy conversations, because we could say what the public is looking like. We could say, oh, the public actually wants this, that, and this thing. How do we get stakeholders who represent these different groups to come together and reach a consensus?
Do you think if people, do you ever read Foundation for Economic Education stories?
Yeah.
Well, they've come out the last day or two about how don't allow the internet, don't allow federal or government regulation of Facebook, because that would then just capture their advanced position, right? So would
but
your
certainly
point,
monopolize.
we can use that big data for participatory democracy.
That's the irony of this whole thing, which is that they're like saying Facebook destroyed democracy, when the data collection mechanisms that they're using are the types of things that could show us unbelievable amounts of sentiment. And if it were publicly reflected to us, we could use it as a big piece of the participatory democracy puzzle, which is like, what do people want? What are their stakeholder groups? Because people are grouped together. People tend to have. You can decide when you look. You can figure out from this data like what the profiles are of these people.
Who is your compadre on
right, and who can represent these different stakeholder groups, and how do you bring those people together in consensus? When you bring those people together in consensus, you can achieve 80+% consensus around issues. And so there's a great
James
asset
Buchanan
here.
called that relative absolute consensus. 80% is the relative, right? The consensus, full consensus would be the ideal, but you're saying 80% is relative consensus, as opposed to 51%.
In Taiwan, they talk about like what can you live with? What can you live with and be generally happy about?
Right.
Like be okay with.
And
if people can. That's what we need. I mean, that's why we have the country right now. Everyone's so upset with each other. Everyone, and it's because we've had hundreds of years of us versus them fighting.
That's what the Anti-Federalists warned about, from a patriot to partisan.
I mean,
right? And you start at the federal at the local government, and you go to state government, and then the federal government. So it all becomes one amorphic body of regulation, as opposed to these clear delineated lines of governance.
And the Democrats and the Republicans love this us versus them concept, right? And I think that's one of the most pernicious parts of this two-party system, which is that the incentive for politicians is to always define the enemy and fight them, and that's how you win your primary. And
divide and conquer.
It's a divide and conquer strategy, and what we need, and with the opportunity for the Libertarian Party, really, what's so exciting to me and why I'm involved is that the Libertarian Party can be the party of consensus. We could actually do it, especially if we can bring the city people who are comfortable paying significant amount of tax to have a lot of public services together with the rural people, and both against the federal government being as massive and as just absolutely ineffective and and still murdering people. I mean, just still completely out of control.
Right, we've been in a war ever since World War. Roosevelt got us in World War II. I mean, then we went straight into Indonesia. To Vietnam, and then in Korea, and then what happened after Korea? Vietnam for real, and then onward.
And plus the CIA was engaged in all this stuff for
CIA, and now it's the Department of Homeland Security. Yeah, it's disgusting. So our director told us we just have 2 minutes left. Devin, we just have a couple minutes left. Any final thoughts you'd like to leave with our viewers? I know you mentioned something, if government is indeed becoming a technology platform, then we should expect more features than periodic voting. We've talked about that. How do we get from here to there, and any final things?
I think that we have to work local in general, and we also have to just we have to hold government to the same standard that we hold companies when it comes to providing us quality products.
Right.
And we know there's tremendous amounts of corruption. We know that,
Sure.
and we need to use basic best practices that are coming out of the software industry for like how to get stuff done. So like one of the big pieces of the participatory democracy movement is this concept of open source. And so I work in the open source field. And open source is something that left and right can kind of agree on. Like open source is using copyright as a method to make intellectual property publicly available and accessible, so that a company can't dominate it. And so,
I agree with you. Intellectual property is just a form of rent seeking.
Yeah.
The Disneyization of our intellectual property.
Absolutely. And so, if we look at what's happening now in cities and regional governments and city governments, and to a lesser extent national governments, but around the world, is that governments are realizing that if they adopt open source methodologies when it comes to their intellectual property, that they can work together to be able to just.
Last thoughts for our audience: how we can improve the American democracy system using participatory democracy.
I mean, I think it's kind of like darkest before the dawn, and people are really talking a lot of people are really depressed about the state of American democracy right now. But software, like these approaches, are maturing in cities and regions all over the world. It's getting easier. So not only is this software technology making it easier to create really comprehensive and effective participatory democracy processes, but the techniques needed to use them effectively are maturing in places like Taiwan and in Reykjavik and and in northern Syria and all over the world. And so it's going to get easier and easier for us to actually implement effective participatory
darkest
democracy
before
processes.
the dawn.
Yeah.
And how do people reach you if you?
I mean, I have a website at devinbalkind.com.
Okay.
Where there's a contact form, and I'm on Twitter and all that stuff.
All right.
People can also come to the Brooklyn Libertarian Party meetings. Where,
look up Devin.
He'll
darkest before the dawn. Devin Balkind, thank you for joining us on Hardfire, and maybe we can talk about this again sometime in a couple of years and see exactly how far we've gotten.
It'd be a
Thank you
pleasure.
for joining.
Social engineering.